Welcome to Dwellings, a podcast from the City of San Jose Housing Department, where we talk with thought leaders about reducing unsheltered homelessness, building affordable housing, and key housing policies. I'm Jeff Scott, and I'll be your host for Season 6 of Dwellings. On today's episode of Dwellings, we sit down with Jennifer Loving, CEO of Destination Home, for an in-depth look at the realities of homelessness in Silicon Valley and what it truly takes to create lasting solutions. Jennifer brings decades of expertise and a grounded, compassionate perspective to one of our region's most urgent challenges. And with that, Jennifer, welcome. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
It's great to be here. My name is Jen Loving, and I am the CEO at Destination Home. My role in the ecosystem has evolved over the years. I have worked in homelessness my entire life. My family actually had a homeless shelter in Southern California when I was growing up. So I was kind of raised that if people needed a place to stay, that you were part of helping to make that happen. And then as you know, I came into adulthood, I've worked in pretty much every kind of shelter or housing program setting you can imagine. I moved to the Bay in the mid-90s, and my first job here was a shelter worker at the Bacardo Reception Center, which is a project by Home First. I joined Destination Home about 15 years ago. Destination Home was actually created purposefully to be the private side of a public-private partnership. The city of San Jose, under then Mayor Reed and the County Board of Supervisors, came together and they did a joint Blue Ribbon Commission on wanting to focus on strategies to end versus manage homelessness. And one of the byproducts from that task force was the creation of Destination Home, who they were hoping would serve as a convener for strategies for homelessness.
So I just have to ask you, you piqued my curiosity. You said that your family operated a homeless shelter. Where, what city was that in?
Yeah, Venice Beach. So my family, my extended family, my aunt and uncle, he was a minister, and they had a small church. And then there was the homelessness crisis was really starting to grow, especially post-Vietnam, people returning for more. It was when housing and wages stopped keeping pace. Veterans were coming home with a lot of trauma. And so they started this work in the 60s and the 70s, and the church is still operating today.
Wow, that is amazing. I thought I knew a little bit about your background, but I didn't know that. Wow, interesting. Can you explain and maybe give us some examples of how Destination Home works with the city of San Jose and the county of Santa Clara?
So Destination Home works with the city of San Jose and the county of Santa Clara in a few different ways. Number one, we provide gap funding. So take our homelessness prevention system as an example. The city and the county put money into the system, but there's also a role for private flexible dollars. And so Destination Home is a joint funder on that initiative. We've also taken the lead on spearheading the community plan to end homelessness, something that we've had 2 cycles and are right now planning our third 5-year cycle. We also try to work to bring temperatures down when necessary, or to try some new innovative things when necessary. For example, guaranteed income was something that was of peak interest to the county. They were rolling out some pilots. We worked to incorporate pilots targeting people who are experiencing homelessness or families experiencing homelessness. And then the city also started to explore that work, in particular with youth homelessness. Another way that we partner with the city and the county is gap funding for housing projects, new housing projects, in terms of rolling out the Measure A bond that was successfully implemented over the last 6 or 7 years. We have private money in about 45 of the 60 projects, which also help to kind of catalyze those projects, remove barriers, bring the costs of construction down. And then generally just work to keep everyone on the same page as much as possible, especially administratively.
And when you say private money, are you talking about wealthy individuals who are making philanthropic donations? Talking about corporate giving? What exactly is private money?
So when I talk about private money, I'm thinking about anything that doesn't come from the government. So whether it's corporate treasury dollars, corporate philanthropic dollars, foundation dollars, individual giving. Destination Home works hard to fundraise for dollars that will go into these different buckets or these different strategies, and it can come from a variety of sources. I would say two very significant funders over the last 6 or 7 years have been tech companies, Cisco and Apple. Have been two large organizations, but then there's also a number of private foundations between the Serato Foundation, the Packard Foundation, Sunlight Giving, Valhalla Foundation, all these groups that are looking to leverage their dollars with public dollars to have more success and see their dollars go farther. And so we work to raise that money and then basically redistribute it. And we've put about $215 million into these different strategies since 2018. The majority of where we're putting our dollars is into direct cash aid, whether it's guaranteed income, homelessness prevention, or other things that's really putting the money back into people's hands. And then the other significant bucket for us is around housing production, development, services, rental subsidies, things like that.
So when you say that you're putting a lot of that money into direct cash back to the people who are in need, is that based on some research or real world experience that you know that that is a very effective use or maybe the highest and best use for a lot of the money that you put back in?
Well, that's a great question. So when you think about how to address the affordable housing crisis, how to address the homelessness crisis, it comes down to one of two things. We either need rents to be reasonable for people that are on retirement, disability, entitlements, minimum wage. You need $55 an hour to afford a market rate apartment in the city of San Jose. We have the highest rents in the entire nation. And we have a lot of people working minimum wage jobs. So those things don't match. So you either need to have housing that's affordable for people, or people need to have more access to resources to be able to pay their rent, right? It's one of the two. Homelessness, it really is, it's pretty simple. It's a housing problem. People can have a lot of associated issues. Anybody who's living in a house can have mental health issues, substance abuse issues, disability issues, chronic health conditions. That is not things that afflict only folks that are poor. That afflicts all of us. But the difference is the ability to be able to have some kind of income, family support, revenue, to be able to maintain your home. And that's what happens when you don't have those resources, right? Then families and individuals are really plunged into homelessness. And so there's been numerous guaranteed income studies all across the country about the efficacy of providing a nominal amount of cash aid that allows for people to then pay their rent and eat, or pay their rent and buy medication. Our elders are in particular tough spots with this because they are on fixed income and they're often spending 80, 90, 100% of their income on rent. And then that's not sustainable. So over time, there'll be a disaster, a health issue, something that will keep them from paying their rent. And then all of a sudden, this cycle of homelessness begins.
Destination Home is in a unique position, working closely with both the city and the county. Can you help our listeners understand the distinct roles of the city and county in addressing homelessness?
That is a really interesting question about what are the right roles and the resources that the different jurisdictions have to provide support. And it's where we go wrong is when we're expecting a jurisdiction really to pay for something that is not in their core services, right? So take the city of San Jose. San Jose is responsible for zoning, for housing development, for asset management, for making housing happen, right? So expecting this city to pay for the healthcare of a whole lot of folks or people living in supportive housing, where's the revenue stream for that? The county, on the other hand, doesn't have responsibility over zoning, land use, real estate, right? And so but they do have the resources to provide services, whether it's services for people to not be homeless, healthcare services, behavioral health services. That is what they do. And so the real good marriage is leveraging both, but making sure it's coming from a place of what are we already really good at. And I would say that works very well when the politics are in our favor and doesn't work as well when the politics are not.
Do you generally see the efforts of the city and county complementing each other? Are there opportunities to enhance our joint efforts?
Something that I think has been frustrating all along when it comes to homelessness is I'd say the general public doesn't have good insight about what's being done, what what research-backed data-informed solutions are. And there's a lot of frustration, of feeling like just do something, whatever it is, to get these people away from, my line of sight. And that doesn't necessarily mean solving homelessness, right? That means sort of managing this issue for people who are not homeless. And that's where the politics come in, because constituencies or elected officials are responsible to their constituencies. But using data-informed, research-backed sound policies, it doesn't always match with the sentiment of the public, right? And so, for example, people will say housing first doesn't work. That is categorically false. Housing first does work in our community. We have a 96% housing retention rate. It was one of the most researched, most effective strategies that has ever existed. But there was never enough funding to bring it to scale. And that's not even a local complaint, that's a federal government complaint. The federal government invests less than 1% of its budget in housing and homelessness, and doesn't do anything on the prevention side, and doesn't invest anywhere near the amount of money that is needed for any community all across the country. And so what that means then is the burden is placed squarely on local jurisdictions who don't have the type of funding necessary to meet this crisis at scale. So that is sort of inherently going to cause conflict. But then sometimes we exacerbate it by pointing fingers, by saying someone is not doing anything or other people are doing all the work. And frankly, generally, when you hear those statements, that's generally not true. The county of Santa Clara invests more into homelessness, frankly, than the city of San Jose does into its own city, because they have more resources to do so, right? And so when it's painted like that's not happening or somebody isn't doing their job, it just kind of creates more of that divisiveness, which is, number one, not getting people housed any faster, and number two, not really making it better for the public, which is what I think was the motivation for kind of having some of these talking points or these sort of decisions. I think the important part about the work is knowing that the elected officials change, but the administrations are the ones that are working together day by day, hand in hand, and need to really be on the same page. And I think one of the bright spots in our local work is how the city administration and the county administration has largely been on the same page. And because of that, we've seen tens of thousands of people get housed. We've seen thousands of new units get built. We've seen tens of thousands of people have their homelessness prevented from ever happening in the first place. And it's also true that there's still a preponderance of people on our streets. But again, that's not because the city or the county isn't working hard. It's because for every one person who gets off our streets, two more are becoming homeless, because rents don't keep pace with wages, because there's a deep scarcity of affordable housing, because there's a very scarce investment by the federal government. And frankly, the state is also proposing cuts, and all of that kind of trickles down and puts the pressure on the local communities. But the places where we should feel our anger is really towards the federal government. And that's agnostic of which administration has been in office. That less than 1% investment into housing and homelessness has been true for many administrations.
Now, there's something called a continuum of care, and I believe Destination Home has a specific role to play in the continuum of care. Can you explain for our audience what exactly is the COC, the continuum of care, and what's its role, and then what is Destination Home's role in it?
The way that our federal government disperses dollars is through something called a continuum of care, or we call it COC. The continuum of care is the entity that's responsible for receiving the federal dollars to make sure that it is being used appropriately, that the money is being managed, and that we're reporting out on the efficacy or the success or the challenges that we've had in administering the federal dollars. America has about 400 continuum of cares, and it is the conduit for federal dollars. So what that means locally is there has to be a continuum of care team, a way to manage our federal database, and a way to have a local funding competition that is equitable and meeting the highest purpose of the funding that's available. And so In our community in Santa Clara County, we get about $48 million a year, which is frankly less than either the city or the county is spending on its own on the same issue of homelessness. But it's still very important dollars. And so for the last many years, since the George W. Bush administration, our continuum has been following the federal rules, which has to do with funding permanent housing, rental subsidies, permanent supportive housing. And that has been a main anchor for funding either services or rental subsidies for formerly chronically homeless people. So usually that's just a consistent renewal process. There may be a tiny bit of extra money given a year to focus on a specific population, like a youth homelessness or veteran homelessness. And often we lose a little bit of funding too, but it's kind of a continual mainstay. So this year, the federal government decided to throw those rules out the window and has said that we're only allowed to have 30% of these dollars go to permanent supportive housing. And again, communities all across the country had probably 90 to 95% of their dollars going to permanent supportive housing. And that the other 70% now must follow a different set of rules. Short-term shelter, points for communities that have carceral approaches, forced treatment, work requirements, things like that. And shelter and temporary housing has a critically important role in the homelessness ecosystem. We need to have places for people to be triaged, but we also really need places for people to exit, or we will just fill up these temporary facilities like they're going to be, people will live there forever, right? And then we won't have other places for people to go. You really need the throughput. It's not an either or, it's not a this is good and this is bad. It's really about having a continuum of services. But this year, the 70% needs to go to those type of solutions. And what's even more complicated is it is a mandated national competition, which means that we're competing with communities all across the country. And it's pretty unclear how California will fare, given some of the divisiveness that we've already experienced. So we could be losing up to 70% of our dollars, which would translate into a couple thousand vulnerable, disabled people being forced back to the streets. And 90% of those people are San Jose residents.
So can you clarify when you say it's a competitive process for these federal dollars and that locally we're competing with cities and counties all over the country? What does that mean? What are we competing for? And is there a scorecard or scoring mechanism of some sort?
Yeah, there's a scoring criteria where you get points for certain things. Number one, they'll look at the competitiveness and how much your proposal that you're submitting meets their criteria. But then they're also going to look for things like, do you have law enforcement on your continuum of care board? Are you willing to agree to mandating treatment for people? Things like that in some more conservative places, that might be the practice, but here in California, that has not always been the practice. And there's a little bit of a confusion there too, where people think, well, that's what we need. We need to be tougher on people. But I'll tell you this, I have been doing this work long enough where I did before George W. Bush, that this is very similar to the way that the federal dollars were used in the 90s. And all of those rules existed, and it didn't help us house people more. It didn't create different shelter settings. I mean, it's really recycling an idea from the 80s that was proven not to be effective that we're recirculating now.
Is any of the money that would normally have come is any of that guaranteed, or is all of it right now up for grabs and we are at risk of losing all of it?
The only money that is guaranteed under this new federal competition is the 30% of the funds that they have said could be used for existing housing projects. So 30% of what we have usually funded, we're thinking will be safe, but we won't know till we go through the competition. And so it's really creating a deficit for the other 70% of dollars that is all programmed. It's paying for site-based services. It's paying to pay rental subsidies. It's paying for supportive services for people that are not in scattered site units. All of those things that are part of the fabric of keeping folks from returning to homelessness is 70% of that is in jeopardy.
Destination home. Are you were talking about the continuum of care is the entity that receives federal dollars. Is does Destination Home kind of administer that or play that role locally, or what exactly is Destination Home's role in the continuum of care?
So when you think about local administration for the continuum of care dollars, the county of Santa Clara is what we call the collaborative applicant. They have a team that manages our federal dollars, that curates the competition, that makes sure that they're leveraging their own dollars that they're either receiving or that are being subcontracted to our partners. They are the lead. Destination Home doesn't have a formal role. I am a co-chair of the Continuum of Care Board. We do not receive federal dollars at Destination Home. We are not part of the Continuum of Care, so we really are a neutral entity that is participating in the local funding competition, because a lot of our other colleagues are either recipients or subrecipients of these dollars. And so the continuum needs some non-conflicted entities to be a part of this process too, especially when it comes to rank and review or how we're determining how to spend the money. And so I am a board member, but Destination Home is not a part of the continuum. We're not funded through the continuum.
Do you see any silver lining to these changes? Do you see any way that these changes could benefit us locally in our efforts to address homelessness?
So in thinking about whether or not there's a silver lining to these federal changes, I would say that the way it's being executed, there is no silver lining. Meaning, do we need more temporary options for people? We do. Should it come from taking money away from people that are already housed? It should absolutely not. If the federal government was really invested in increasing resources and had a philosophy that they felt like was the best and brightest way to address homelessness, then that funding should have been additional. Cutting funding, making elders and families homeless, which these changes will likely do, doesn't help local communities in resolving the already overwhelming number of people they have on their streets. So if the federal government would have said, we're really looking to foster more emergency temporary housing, so we're going to add another X, millions of dollars to do that, that would have been fine and great. And that is some of the local work that the city and the county has done together to expand the resources that are involved in our local system. But by doing it this way, and there really is no silver lining. It's really not even about philosophy. It's about taking away what we know works and not having a source to replace that and putting a lot of people into jeopardy.
But do you see a role for the state to kind of step in and help out?
Well, the state of California had already proposed some pretty significant cuts to the local dollars, the HAP dollars that came, the housing, homelessness, and prevention dollars that were coming into the local jurisdictions. They were proposing some pretty drastic cuts. That was already a huge problem for local jurisdictions to lose that money. So, given these draconian federal cuts, the state had already been signaling that they were also cutting dollars, and they need to reevaluate that position. They need to be putting not just previous year's funding, but additional funding into California cities to mitigate these cuts that are coming. Or again, we will just see homelessness rising all across the state.
As you look ahead, what gives you hope or reason for optimism as we continue working to end homelessness?
Well, Uh, when we think about what the bright spots are locally in our work, I would point to a couple things. Number one, preventing homelessness. Preventing homelessness is the least expensive intervention that we could spend, which is good in times of less dollars, and also is frankly the single most obvious answer to our homelessness crisis is to stop it before it even starts. So we have a Santa Clara County homelessness prevention system that is jointly funded between the city of San Jose, the county of Santa Clara, Destination Home, that is targeting serving thousands of people a year. That's critical. That's something that we need to do more of. We need to keep as many people from losing their housing as possible, because now once people hit the streets, there are not enough shelter beds, there are not enough supportive housing units, and there is certainly nowhere near the affordability in the marketplace for folks to be able to self-resolve their homelessness. And so if we can't catch people on the front end, it's much more costly, much more inhumane for people to have to and also they could be on our streets for a long period of time. So I think that's really important. Another is efforts to bring the cost of construction down. So Destination Home is a funder in the Bay Area Housing Investment Fund. And what we're doing is really trying to work to supplant often state dollars that take a long time to be executed and replace that with some private dollars that makes these projects less expensive and can move a lot quicker. Now, that's not at scale, but bringing the cost of development down by several $100s a door is a really important bright spot at a time when there's no more local source for developing housing and when funding is so scarce.
The HPS, the homelessness prevention system that you just mentioned, can you just quickly give our listeners kind of some insight into what is that? How does that work? What does it look like?
So the Santa Clara County Homelessness Prevention System started in 2017 with a budget of only $1 million, and it was mostly privately funded. And today, the system is operated by the County of Santa Clara and is an annual budget of about $30 million. And the reason that that's important is it helps us serve a lot more people. We were able to go from serving hundreds of people a year to thousands of people. The way that we administer these dollars is through a network of community-based nonprofits. There are 20 organizations that are already on the front lines of working with people that are on the verge of becoming homeless. Places like Sacred Heart, Amigos de Guadalupe, Latinas Contra Cancer, agencies that are already seeing massive amounts of housing insecure people. The addition of this financial resource means that we're allowed to move quickly to keep a family from becoming homeless. So basically families or individuals say, I'm in trouble, I can't pay my rent. We're looking for the folks that what we call are the most vulnerable, meaning if they don't get this intervention, they'll likely end up on the streets. We're really trying to program this intervention to reduce the amount of people that are coming into homelessness month over month. And so if you qualify, which generally means you're at below 30% of area median income, it generally means that you have a significant amount of barriers. That is who we want to be serving. And then the resources, the funding is given, and it's in a flexible way, meaning homelessness is not a monolith. Everyone has, just like you and I, have our own individual reasons that we are in trouble. I might have a healthcare issue. You might have a housing issue. And so this funding is really flexible, meaning maybe we need to pay the rent. Maybe we need to pay to help someone relocate, because the idea of coming up with that much money to relocate, even if they could pay the rent after they get in, that's often a barrier for people, first, last deposit, right? So if we could take care of that. It might be a car repair because they're not able to go to work because their car is broken, or a childcare bill, which is keeping them from going to work. Whatever that is, we try to remove that barrier. And 94% of the time, people are staying in their homes. And what's even more important about this system is it is the only system that was the subject of a randomized control trial study in America. No other homelessness prevention system has been studied and evaluated with the highest level of analytical rigor independently through the University of Notre Dame. They did a multi-year study on our homelessness prevention system and published a study that showed that this cash intervention is statistically significant at keeping people from becoming homeless. We already knew that, but having the research in hand, I think, helps make the case for funding. And again, like with everything else, there's not enough money to resolve all of the problems. A lot of people still get turned away. We don't have enough dollars to help everyone who needs it because there are tens of thousands of people who need help in our community.
Now, back to your organization, Destination Home. You're looking out 5, 10 years from now. As you look out over that time horizon, do you see Destination Home evolving? Do you see your mission and your work evolving?
So when I think about the future for Destination Home specifically, I think in a couple of areas. Number one is homelessness prevention. I think our body of research, the way our local system has been administered is replicable in different places in the country. And we're working with some other communities to do that. We want to show that cash aid homelessness prevention is a strategy that can work in any community, whether it's rural or urban or tribal. And we want to demonstrate that to the federal government because right now they do not fund anything regarding prevention. And we believe that that should be part of the funding that comes through the continuum of care. So I see us in that front. And then also lived experience of homelessness and people with lived experience of homelessness is really important to us as one of our core values. And we try to make sure that people who have the most expertise on this issue have experienced homelessness themselves, have experience going through our programs and projects and our systems, are helping to advise the ways to make the system work better for people. And so we have a lived experience board. We're going to be launching a national lived experience board. And we work hard to make sure there's lived experience representation on whether it's panels or funding groups or policy groups or basically whatever work is happening in Silicon Valley, that lived experience leadership is a core component of that. And then I think the other critical thing for all of us is we need a new revenue source to keep developing housing. We'll never be able to solve homelessness with any one tool. We need to keep people from losing their homes in the first place, but we also need to be increasing the supply of housing that is accessible and affordable to our most vulnerable people. And we produce extremely low income housing, which is for folks earning between 0 and 30% of area median income. That's families on minimum wage, elders on disability, Social Security. They're all in that bucket. People who have served our country, spent their whole lives working, are now, right, facing a rental market that they cannot access. And even though while they're performing a lot of the service industry jobs that everyone else relies on. And so we need new sources for being able to build deeply affordable housing.
Jennifer, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your insights. I found the conversation very enlightening. Do you have any final thoughts for our audience?
Thanks, Jeff, for giving me the time today to talk with you. And I would say if there was any one takeaway, I would say that the anger that people need to feel is really not at our local governments. Our local governments are working hard to invest the resources that they have, but we are dramatically underfunded through the federal government to be able to provide funding and tools that can solve homelessness at scale. And that is entirely controllable by the federal government. There is one federal housing subsidy for every 5 families who qualify for the assistance in America. So that means 80% of families and individuals that need help are unable to get it. And so then that becomes a local challenge of trying to figure out how to sustain individuals without having ongoing sources of dollars for rental subsidies. If the federal government was able to increase their housing vouchers through the housing authorities, even a little bit more than they're doing now, we would see a lot less people on our streets. And so, number one, it's like knowing who to really be angry at. And then number two is really understanding that crime and drugs and all these other things that get associated with poverty are not necessarily the definition of who needs our help and who is really struggling. Elders, families, so many children are sleeping in their cars. So many parents are trying to raise their children in cars or in sheds or in garages. There's a lot of different people that end up becoming homeless because homelessness is at the core an economic problem. And we're living in the region that has the highest rate of income inequality in the whole nation. And so I think remembering that is important too.
Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us today. Thanks for listening to Dwellings, the City of San Jose Housing Department podcast. Our theme music is Speed City, composed and performed by Attain Charles. Thanks to San Jose Jazz for letting us use their music. If you like the show, please subscribe and share with your friends and family. If you're looking for more ways to help address housing and homelessness issues in San Jose, please check out the show notes. You can follow the Housing Department on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SJ City Housing. And if you have questions or comments about today's episode, please send them to housingcoms@sanjoseca.gov. The artwork on our website was created by Chelsea Palacio. Dwellings is produced by me, Jeff Scott, and Jose Chavez of the Housing Department.